Hello, everybody. I'm Priscilla Stone. Welcome to Quantum Witch Cafe, your safe place to talk about anything paranormal, fringe, bookish, taboo, basically anything. Anything that you probably would not say at a conservative person's table is welcome here. And tonight I have been lucky enough to have secured Alexia Onyx, the author of Come Out, which is an amazing book. Dark romance is kind of like the genre, right?
Yeah, dark
So,
romance.
I didn't know if there's any, like sometimes they overlap genres depending on the content. But tonight she will be talking about that book and some work that she's doing, just in general with her books. So Alexia, can you introduce yourself to everybody and tell them how you got into writing and why you decided to write the type of things that you write?
Sure. So my name is Alexia Onyx. I am a dark romance author, and I do tend to float over into the paranormal space. My first series is a ghost dark romance series, so we've got ghost love interests. The reason I decided to actually go this direction as a faithful dark romance lover is I have had a lot of personal paranormal experiences, and I thought that since this is like an interest of mine and something I've experienced firsthand, it would be a great way to write something I love and know.
Yes, for sure. And I love that. I know I think that yours is the first Ghost Boyfriend book that I've read. I barely started reading dark romance last summer, I want to say. I've
Okay,
always
can I
read.
ask what your first was?
I think that he's my first ghost book boyfriend. So,
Oh,
so I read. I think my first one was Santana Knox's book,
uh-huh.
Heartless Heathens, and then from there, just kind of like different ones would hop in. I guess the dark romance classics, Haunting Adeline, stuff like that. But yours was the first like ghost boyfriend. So I was like, ooh, a ghost boyfriend. I lost somebody very close to me, and I always wondered what it would be like to have him back. So reading your book and he was a little wild, like the main character. So, or the MMC, I should say. Hi, Mindforked, how are you? So I'm seeing people joining the chat if you're wondering who I'm talking to. But yeah, tell me about what made you write Come Out, because this is your latest release, right?
Yes. So what inspired it really was I don't know if this inspired it, but this heavily influenced it once I realized the parallels was American Horror Story, which is like one of my favorite shows of all time. Specifically the first season, Murder House. Tate and
Yeah.
Violet just stuck with me. They were just like, I really love tragic romance, and I wanted to take that and kind of make my own spin on it. And their dynamic was something I really loved when I watched the show. So that heavily influenced it once I realized how many parallels there were between it. But that wasn't the original inspiration. The original inspiration was just my own brain and these characters coming out to talk to me and me being like, should I write this? Because actually, the first scene that ever popped in my head is the one where she's hiding in the closet or behind the door. I think I changed it to the basement, but she's hiding behind a door and she's sitting there on the floor and he's looking for her. And that was the first way they ever showed up to me. So that's really that scene inspired the entire book.
I love it. And another thing that I love about this book in particular, and I plan on reading more of your books because now you're like one of my favorite authors.
Well, thank you.
So I love the representation of. I remember like some of the books I was reading that were just like normal, kind of like light romance. I think like a few years ago, I got into some like angel and fae romance, like 99-cent novella type things on Kindle, like probably like 10 years ago. But all the girls were like these, like Western beauty standard.
Yeah.
Um, like her legs were to the sky and her eyes were as blue as topaz, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I definitely have emerald eyed dudes inside my books, but but for the females, I was just like, oh, like I just, as a reader, you want to be able to kind of like immerse yourself in the story, and it's hard to do that when you don't feel represented. Also, the representation for just people avoiding certain topics, right? So a lot of taboo stuff, there's a lot of like judgment for that. So what sorts of representation do you like to write about in your books?
I would say like my main focus is queer and like people in larger bodies, so fat representation, plus size representation, really whatever readers are comfortable with that name. I know people have their own opinions on that, but I do write like all people in larger bodies. At least one of my characters will always be that. So usually, like historically, I feel like it's been the FMC, but I would love to expand like body diversity into all of my characters. So usually, since my character casts are so small, like literally 2 people for 90% of the book, it'll either be the FMC, the MC, or possibly both in the future. So that's kind of my bread and butter. But then also I love to write queer characters because, you know, as a queer person who is on the spectrum of being multisexual, I like to write people who are like bi, pan, who fall in that kind of arena. Book 2 will have a lesbian FMC. So I really like to try and include the queer community in my books and make dark romance for them, because I feel like a lot of dark romance is written with a straight, like heterosexual lens.
I love that, because so many more people are, you know, opening up about their sexuality. And, you know, I feel like Anne Rice had a lot of that in her Interview with the Vampire, and they kind of like cut that out for the movie. They kind of made a little bit of flirty, but it was not as, you know, loving as it, or no, well, some of it wasn't loving in the book, but you know what I mean? It wasn't as, you know, queer as it was written in the book, and she definitely intended for it to be that way. And now we have the show and they brought it back. But I love seeing that too, because I was writing a scene in one of my vampires. He's like, it's not about like your parts, it's about like your energy and who you are. And I was nervous to write it, but after reading more books like yours and other people's, I'm like, oh, I am allowed to write about this. It's almost like that taboo that scares people away, but we're not afraid of some female FMC getting like all this horrible stuff done to her, but we're like, oh no, the guys can't kiss, or no sword crossing, you know, like it's so silly of us. Like
no, totally.
So
it's an interesting thing to see how people react to that. I've had a lot of feedback about people telling me that it wasn't necessary to have my characters be queer because they are in a hetero looking relationship together. So that's been an interesting thing to kind of like navigate. But obviously I think it's necessary and important to have queer people just existing in books.
Well, people are like that, and a lot of people that are queer but in hetero relationships feel like they can't talk about their, you know, their love interest outside of that. You know, do you think just because you picked somebody that is, you know, like hetero, you're in a hetero relationship, that means that's all that you ever have wanted, or that's all that you ever look at? So it's very important to have that in there. I like to ask this question, and it's kind of, I haven't been interviewing authors of fiction very long, but I like to ask, you know, can you, if you were to introduce your characters, and we'll start with Come Out, because I know you have a lot of characters, and there's probably some up there that just live there with you and they haven't been written yet, you know?
Yeah.
If you're going to introduce your characters from Come Out, how would you introduce them? Like, this is so-and-so, and they like,
yeah.
you know?
I would say Sky, if I was like, this is Sky, she is heavily introverted, not a people person. Her cat is her best friend, and she loves a horror flick. And then for Aiden, I would say Aiden is an alternative rule breaker, outcast to the core, very comfortable with who he is and proud of it, and very possessive of his little wraith.
And I love that little wraith. That was like, I saw that, you know, when you read through Kindle and it has like the most highlighted, the highlighted comments is just like I was like, I could see why people love this, because it just hits home. And then also when she's talking about, when Sky is talking about like her loneliness and her, you know, dark and depressives and her need to seek these outside sources to help herself, a lot of people, like you said something about sad girls in the book, you know what I mean? Like a lot of sad girls will relate to that, because, you know, we often see this like little sunshine and bad boy dynamic in dark romance.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, in this one, it's like they're both dark and twisty, but he definitely wants to, you know, help her and save her, which I cannot talk too much about because I don't want to give something away, because I'm just in love with him. Okay, I have some questions here. So this writer's talk, kind of, you know, we're just having a conversation. It's mostly for Alexia's book. It is for Alexia's book, Come Out, and there's a ghost boyfriend in it. So go read it, Lane girl. But yeah, so what sort of things in this book have people kind of like come at you at? Like, what has been the most controversial aspects of any of your writing that has either been difficult to navigate or just like wondering why you have to navigate it in the first place?
Yeah, I would say the one that people push back against the most is the depression representation and the way I've done it. I think it's also I will say, I just want to point that out, that it has been equally positive, if not more positive, but I definitely have gotten a lot of pushback on kind of like the brutality of the like representation and not really shying away from like suicidal ideation, which I think is very taboo, especially in romance. And I think for me, it was really important to be like, well, this is a reality and this is one side of it. And of course, not everyone's experience is the same, but like this is really important to me to go to battle for and make sure like I'm, standing by that representation, because I think like while people might think it's not necessary, I think it's very validating and an important way to break down that topic and get people to feel like they do have, that people can talk about it in like a more social or like casual setting. Like it's not something that has to be taboo. Like a lot of people struggle with it. And I wanted it to be not romanticized, but just normalized. So people feel like, oh, like I'm not alone. And I feel like people are more likely to get help when they feel that way, whereas they think it's some deep, dark secret where they can't talk about it with anyone. So that was like the biggest thing. And like I said, just I think having a queer male main character in dark romance is hard for some people to swallow. I think we're used to these very macho, like almost like toxic masculine kind of guys. And I think that while Aiden does have a few like some of those characteristics, I really wanted him to be a lot softer and queer and like very accepting of that, and like and I wanted him to be comfortable with being both very, very masculine and very like one of those dominating kind of like typical dark romance characters, and also embracing more typically feminine traits, like art and wearing a crop top and stuff like that. So I think those are the two main things that I've really seen people kind of get upset about.
Aiden's definitely a rock star type. I feel like, he's like that tortured artist. I just love how he cares for her in the ways that she needs until he pisses her off. Not one scene, and she's like, "I'm not talking." But I mean, other
We
than
all
that,
have our limits.
he's like giving her. So she has these self-destructive tendencies, right? Like self-harm, self-medication, isolation, which to me, like, I don't like to leave the house, so I just like relate to that. Yeah, he gives her like what she wants, but as a means to like have her trust him and open up more. Like it's almost like I feel like we're talking about somebody real because I'm sick of that. And I'm a writer too, so I'm like I feel like these characters are.
I mean, yeah, they feel real to me.
Yeah. I just feel like Aiden, like really cared for Sky in the way that only he could, because he understood her to the point where he's like, she does these horrible things to herself, but that's her way of handling it. My main thing is like to keep her from like expiring.
Mm-hmm.
Which...
Yeah, I think really like he says in the book, like he really found purpose in trying to help her and understand her and just be there for her, which I think he could very clearly identify like she's never had. And I think that was something that was really important to like have this character who could like step into that position for her. And I think we see that vice versa at the like towards the end when Sky really talks about like, oh, now it's my turn to like really, emotionally support Aiden and like be his person. And I think that was really important for me too, because while Aiden is a very nurturing person, I didn't want it to be like, oh, he's, he was already running on empty when they met. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you have to read this book, guys. I don't want to give up a lot, but like it's
hard to talk about without.
It's hard to talk about without spoiling, because it's just so good. And if a lot of people, I don't know, I was watching your promos and you put a lot of like love and work into them. Like you have like this song like reminds me of this chapter, and as a writer, like I know exactly what you're talking about. Like there is a song for every scene.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's true for everybody that writes, but there's definitely like the song that you're hearing or listening to as you're writing a scene, or sometimes they inspire an entire scene. What does your playlist look like, and what are your like top 3 songs that inspired like scenes in your book or that just were like on repeat while you were writing?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. This book was heavily inspired by music, but really all of my writing is like I'm not musically talented, but I love music so much. I listen to it 24/7, and it's very much a core part of my writing process. But I would say like the first song that really resonated with this story was Lonely Day. And that kind of was the catalyst for like a lot of the emotional internal monologues. I think I listened to that song like a million times over the last year, just like really thinking about like the headspace, and it just really resonated with the characters. I will say Nirvana in general was a huge inspiration for these characters and like their personalities for some reason. They just really both gravitated towards them. And I know I'm talking about them like they're real people, but they are kind of in my head. They made a lot of sense for what happened with this book. So I would say, yeah, Nirvana, just kind of like the sound. The sound of Nirvana's music, I feel like really resonates kind of with the tone of the story for me. And then one more I would say is definitely going to be like, this is kind of in left field, but I don't know if you've heard of the musician Kira. It's kind of like it's very different from everything else that I've been talking about, but it's kind of like emo rap meets like I don't even know what it's called. It's a very specific genre. It's like almost like kind of like ravey, like bass, emo, like some kind of combination. But the artist's voice sounds so much like what I think Aiden would sound like, or just like his like there's a grit to it that really reminds me of Aiden. So those three things
Mm.
were really influential. And then Queen, of course, which is Aiden's favorite band, and I listened to a ton of Queen to inspire his character, just because like I was thinking like another powerful like queer man who was very emotionally empathetic, driving that character.
Yeah, I love it. And when I saw your playlist, I was like, yes, yes, because I'm old and I listen to Nirvana and like it's that whole like it does scream Nirvana like that. Just that whole like 90s grunge, dark, depressy, like we're depressed and we're just gonna tell everybody.
Yeah,
No. Which is fine.
pretty much.
So I was trying to explain your book earlier to my husband. I was like, it's about like a plus size goth girl that is lonely and depressed, and she has a ghost boyfriend, and he's just like, you would. I'm like relatable, relatable. I just don't have the ghost boyfriend.
Yeah.
Not yet. Not yet.
That
Not
you
that
know
attitude, right? So let's talk about audiobooks. So somebody asked me if this was on audiobook. Now you're
Yeah,
working on
so
it, right?
it's going to be, yes. The rights were just acquired by Tantor Media, so they will be producing audiobooks in the near future. I don't have details on dates, but it will be all 3 books in the series.
Very cool. Do you get to have any say like on the voice actors, or is that something that is a collaborative effort with your with them?
I believe I'll have some say, but I think it's collaborative as well. I don't know the full details on that, honestly. That will, I'm sure, be discussed shortly. But yeah, I think I'll have some say, but I don't know that I'll have complete control, if that makes sense.
So another fun question that I always was thinking about when I was reading it: who would you cast that's like either like it could be a musician, dead or alive, actor, dead or alive for these characters?
That's like the hardest question ever.
I
Only
know.
because I'm so specific about like they're just so they're people to me, like in their
Yeah.
own right, So I would say I would definitely choose someone who's like way lesser known. I'm trying to think like who I can even picture as Aiden. Like they definitely have to have like a physical transformation. I feel like because like the people who are probably in my head, like their personalities would just not mesh with him. Obviously they're actors. So I'm trying to think. I
Yeah.
feel like I would want like someone who's actually this is such a tough one. I would what would be most important to me? I don't know that I have fan cast necessarily because I'm trying to think of like it's so hard because there's like no plus size actresses. First of all, like I
Yeah.
think someone who probably comes to mind, but I don't think that she's quite right would be Barbie Faria, someone who looks similar to her, but probably not her because she's so well known. I'm a very
Yeah.
difficult caster, honestly. I feel like I'm so selective.
Oh, sure, sure.
But for Aiden, I just know it would be really important to cast someone who is also queer. For me, I think would be the most important thing. But yeah, I'm so bad at like I'm not super up to date on pop culture right now, and I feel like the sucky thing is there's not a lot of actors and actresses who fit like the marginalizations of my own
Right.
character, which is like always, which is another reason why I create the media I do, is because I feel like I don't see the people that I want to see in popular media, so I want to create it.
That's totally understandable. And I couldn't even pick, like it's hard when you're imagining somebody in your head because that's
Yeah.
like them when you're writing these people, these characters are like people. Like I was like mad at
Yeah.
one of my vampires the other day. I'm like, I'm spending all my time promoting you. All I do is think about you. I'm editing the novel. You're in the novel. You're being a dick there. Like, like I was like, I
Yeah.
felt like I was fighting with one of my characters. Do you have
Yeah.
any characters like that that you kind of love to hate? Like, it doesn't have to be from come out. Like, are there any of your books that or works in progress where you're like, dude, like you get on my nerves, like.
Yeah, actually, for the second book in the series, Warmer Colder, I feel like I have a lot of that clashing with both characters. The one of the main characters, Becca, who is actually Aiden's sister, who Aiden's the main character of Come Out, Come Out. She is very. We have similarities in some ways, like with my past self that I really don't enjoy. Like she's really caught up in perfectionism and people pleasing, and she doesn't really come into it. Like she's not really her own individual person. She's very lost in being a twin and a daughter and like pleasing everyone. And she's very frustrating to me. But in some good ways. Like I definitely empathize with her. But I've had a really hard. It's probably been one of the hardest times I've ever had writing a book because she's like stuck in these patterns that I definitely was when I was younger. Because these characters are quite a bit younger than me, given the time frame, because it happens 5 years before Come Out starts. Um, for obvious reasons, if you read the book, you know why. But yeah, so it's difficult and it's frustrating in that sense. And then the other FMC, Stassi, I feel like she's like the kind of girl who like would bully me and I would secretly have a crush on. So we clash a lot. Like I clash a lot with writing her in that way. I'm like, are you being too mean or is this like still fun? So yeah, they've probably been the two where I've been like, okay, we need to like circle back on this and like really like kind of fight for dominance here.
Very fun. I totally feel that. Sometimes I'm like, why would she do that? Like
Right.
why would you let him do that or let her do that? Yeah. So that definitely resonates with me. What sort of writer are you? Let's talk like your writing process, your creative process. Like you're laying there and these characters pop into your head or like a scene pops into your head. Are you a plotter or do you pants? You just like sit down and write and kind of like let them take over as you're writing?
Yeah, so I'm definitely a pantser. I would say the extent of any kind of planning that I ever do is writing a couple bullet points when something comes to mind, but it's really not my style to plot because I always just disregard it anyway. Because like I said, my characters are extremely vocal in my head, like they decide everything. Um, when I'm writing, I feel like it's very much like I'm watching a movie and my hands are just moving and then it comes out. Like I feel like I really don't have a lot of say in the drafting process. It's just kind of like, okay, this is what I'm imagining and this is what's happening, play out in my head, and I'm just kind of typing it. So yeah.
So you just put on your music and go. I like it. Yeah, I tried plotting something and I was like, this is overwhelming.
Yeah, I think it works for some people, and I think it just really depends on kind of how your creativity manifests. But it's definitely hasn't been for me the many times I've tried.
Yeah, there's so many things to think about, and I just feel like sometimes I'm like, I can't even think about like tomorrow what I want to
Right.
do, let alone like a whole like book. So did the whole series come to you? I know some writers that I know, like they get like the whole series at once. They're like, it's going to be this many books. I don't know, like even if you're a pantser, they know that it's going to be like a long series. Was this like that for you, or did you write this? Or did you write come out, and then start getting ideas, kind of like coming off the characters for the rest of the series?
Yeah, so initially it was supposed to be the single book, and I was like, okay, this is definitely not going to be a series. And then as I got towards the end, like during like the final draft, I was like, well, I feel like Becca has a very strong voice in my head because if you read it, there's a lot of like you understand like you know what happened to her, but I feel like there's a lot of context in the same on purpose. Like um, I think she had a story to tell, and I wanted to tell that from her POV because there was an alternate reality in which I was considering telling more from Aiden's perspective, but I just felt like it wasn't his story to tell, and he couldn't tell it correctly. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna write a second book for Becca, and then after that, I was like, oh wait, there's a third story here. And then I was like, okay, like that, it has to be three stories because I want to eventually I have other ideas that I want to work on in different types of like subgenres of dark romance. So yeah, that's how it came out to be a series, and it was very much like I had no plan at the beginning, and it kind of unfolded from there.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the things that you wanted to fill in about Aiden will be filled in through her story too, because he's obviously part of her life. So,
Yeah, I will
um,
say there's Aiden is like there kind of in the background in a couple parts, and like his sister obviously talks about him throughout the book, like they're twins.
mhm.
But I will say like it's definitely like I wanted to be very sure that it was not like Aiden's book or he wasn't taking over because
Right.
they are supposed to be read separately. Like you don't have to read book 2 if you read book 1 and vice versa. Like you can read these
Okay.
in order. But yeah, but Aiden will be there in her in her thoughts, her talking about him a little bit, and then like of course like seeing him in the background in a couple of scenes, but it's hard because of the timeline. Like I can't really I don't want to talk about it too, like give too much detail because, like,
Right.
obviously, like you said, like it's hard to talk about not spoiling things. But yeah, Aiden will be there. So if you love Aiden, you'll see him, but you might not. You will see him in a little bit of a different light because it's not his story. You know what I'm saying? Like Becca has her own opinions about him,
Oh, sure. Yeah. As
lovingly,
you
of course,
as
but
well.
so like
Yeah.
see each other very differently than what you see when they're talking about themselves, and vice versa. You'll see definitely a really different side to Becca, I think, when you read book 2.
Very cool. So, are you going to be doing, or do you have any like conventions planned? Will you be at any? I know there's a lot like happening that I don't even know about. Are you going to do any like book signing conventions or signings anywhere?
Yeah, so this summer, I think it's June 24th. I will be at Love and Devotion in San Diego. It's a romance book convention. And then for next year, I will be I can only announce one so far. I'll be at Book Harvest in October, which is in Chicago.
Very fun. That
That's like kind of like a spooky vibes type theme.
you mentioned you like paranormal, right? So, will your whole series have paranormal aspects to them?
Sorry, the rest of the series?
Yes.
Yeah, so all 3 of these books will be ghost dark romance, and at least one of the characters will be a ghost. And there will be other paranormal things kind of going on in one of them, I think. I'm still drafting the 3rd book, so we'll see. But yes, they will all have ghosts. And I plan on kind of writing paranormal adjacent, but not ghost for my next series is the plan. So still kind of in that same realm. I really want to kind of like keep it within my interests for now. And I'm very much like, I like spooky things and paranormal things of different types. So that's kind of where I'm going to niche for a while.
Very cool. I love it. I'm all about the paranormal. So you
Yeah.
said you had paranormal experiences throughout your life. Do you would you be able to share any of your experiences that kind of started this fascination?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot, like since as long as I can have like I have any kind of memories, I've been having like these types of experiences. So I've had like, I know if you don't believe in paranormal stuff, this is probably gonna sound really absurd, but like I've had like people talking to me in the middle of the night, like through like portraits and stuff that I had in my house, and then I've seen like literal like ghostly figures like walking through one of my other houses. I've had like things happen where like literally my shirt like lifted over my head in one house, and I've been like locked in rooms. It's just like I've really had like so many things where I've like felt people sitting next to me. I've seen people in like showers. Like I feel like I've had like the full spectrum of what you can say is a paranormal experience, from just like feeling something like uncomfortable to like actually physically seeing stuff to like having full on interactions. So yeah, pretty much the full spectrum for the most part.
Yeah, very cool. Have you done any like investigations or do
No,
you do any
so
paranormal investigation of the places that you live in? You're like, okay, well, that was a spirit. I better investigate, or do you just kind of just let them do their thing?
typically I let them do their thing if they're not like bothering me, which is the most of the time it's just like I know that they're there and we're there together kind of thing, and I kind of mind my business. I have had some things that were kind of like more extreme happen where I really haven't done any investigating because I did have like a couple really intense things happen to me back to back. And I did end up seeing like a medium to help me because I had like this one thing happening and I was like really, really sick from it. And it was like a spirit attachment, which is funny because I think this is going to kind of inspire some of the stuff that's going to happen in book 3. Um, but yeah, so I've seen like a medium to get some more information on that situation. But I've never like kind of like internet sleuthed or like tried to like communicate directly by asking. So yeah, kind of yes and no to that question.
Okay. And so now I'm only saying it like that because you're like, book 3, this might happen. So I'm just being nosy, which is, I guess, a
Oh yeah,
positive.
I love to like kind of tease things. I will say I'm always one of those people who like my drafting is like such a messy process. But I always have in mind like once I start writing something and the characters start talking to me, I have an idea of like what their experiences are going to be, and they always draw on my own like trauma. I'm a person who really likes to stay in my own lane, and luckily I have a lot of things to pull from. So I really once I decide kind of get to know the characters, I kind of know where things are going to go as far as like what the big like thing is for them. And for them, I think it's going to be tackling this whole
Very cool.
paranormal stuff. So
I'm looking. Yeah, I'm excited to read them. So we have a question. It's directed towards me, but I want to ask you this because it's an interesting question. Do you ever laugh uncontrollably when writing funny characters? Personally, I haven't written any funny characters, but they say funny things, usually inappropriate humor. How about you?
yeah, I wouldn't say my characters are like purposely funny, but they say funny things, like things that make me laugh, like just absurd things. Like there are some things that come out lines where I was like, really, we're saying this, and they were like, yeah, this is how I feel. Like there's like very unserious moments where I'm like, okay, that actually really made me like laugh out loud.
Yeah, I get that for sure. Let's see if there's any more questions. No, everybody's just hanging out. And you can't get too weird on here. This started as a UFO and paranormal podcast.
Awesome.
And those are the types of authors I was talking to.
Okay.
UFO researchers, occult researchers, paranormal researchers. And then this year I was like, I want to talk to some dark romance people. I want to
Yeah,
talk
I
to
actually
some.
listened to one of your recent episodes and it was really good. I was super interested. I think it was the UFO one. I want to say it was like one of the ones that was kind of higher up on the list, but I did listen to one of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're like, why is this UFO person asking me to come on?
Oh, no. I mean, I was just really interested because I'm interested in all of that. Like anything like kind of like conspiracy-esque or, well, I mean, like what you would categorize as that. But like I
Yeah.
really enjoy like aliens, UFOs, like things that people really don't believe in that I'm like very open to. I'm very open to things based on what I've experienced. I'm like, this can't really be all of what's out here. So I'm like very open-minded about all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So I think that's probably why I like your writing so much because I'm like another spooky girl. I love it.
Yeah. I'm definitely one of those people who's like, you know, you never know. I feel like a lot of things could be out there that I haven't seen that other people have seen, and I've had like lots of weird experiences about like across the board, not just ghosts.
Are you going to stick with human ghosts or do you anticipate having any like I guess paranormal creatures, demons or anything like that?
I think it's highly possible. I'm not sure how I'm going to how I'm going to categorize the next series that I have but it's definitely in the paranormal realm, but it's not necessarily ghosts. So I'm trying to figure out how to classify kind of like what my concept is there. But yeah, I could see demons or monsters or maybe even aliens being a potential part of a series. Like I said, I really would like to niche down and kind of like the spooky vibes subgenre of dark romance because I do enjoy monster romance as well. So I think a way to bridge that and not make it fantasy is to stick into paranormal territory.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I haven't read a lot of monster romance, but it's definitely catching my eye.
Yeah, I will say a lot of the genre is pretty light, like in
Oh,
terms of the romance and like the tone of the books, which I do read here and there and I do enjoy. But if I were to write it, it would not be like typical kind of lighter, like sweeter romance. It would be like dark in the dark realm for sure. But that's kind of like a convention of the genre. Typically, is like a lot of the stories are like sweeter, but they have monsters and yeah.
okay.
There are some darker ones for sure. I've read a couple, but just like from what I understand and what I've seen, it's pretty much like that.
I tried to write a really sweet tentacle short story and I just couldn't do it. I'm like, this is too cute. It's too cozy. Like I have to do something messed up. like
Yeah, yeah. I've written a lot of sweeter stories, but I always find myself like really yearning for the darker stuff. I feel like it just comes a lot more naturally to me, and it's easier for me to write. And I feel like it's like more cathartic for me. And when I write, I really like writing is very much a tool for me to kind of like process things. So while I do enjoy reading and writing some sweeter stuff, I don't think it's what I'll focus on going forward.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to keep everything sweet, especially if you're some people are just inclined to read and write things that are not cozy.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
So, would you consider yourself like a taboo writer? Because I know that word's been thrown around so much lately, around Bookstagram and Book Talk and all these, book areas or these book spaces that are on social media.
I will say that I don't have a problem with being considered a taboo author. I think like maybe towing the line of it, because when I think of taboo historically, and I've been like pretty heavily in the bookish space as like a book talker and on Bookstagram and stuff for like 4 years now, and I will say usually taboo is more like I'm trying to think of like step siblings or like a huge age gap, but I do think eh, like in general, writing about depression, suicide, and stuff like that is kind of borderline taboo, especially kind of in the romance space. So I would say yes, and I think like there's a high likelihood that I will write like very much like classic taboo literature in the future. I really am a fan of the step sibling trope. I know that's not for everyone, but I do have some stuff in mind for that, and like I do want to write like captive romance, which I know like that would I would consider that taboo. I've already drafted that, so yeah, I would say like I if I'm not fully in the taboo space as of right now, for some people, I think like there's a high likelihood that I will enter that space and kind of operate there at some point.
Yeah, it's hard when you're just like so open to kind of say like what's taboo, what's not. Like I was telling somebody about your book, they're like, wait, like with the self harm thing with the cutting, and I was like, it's a real thing, and they're just like, people write about that. I'm like, yes. Like I
Yeah.
had to explain to people like what knife, because there's knife play. This is not necessarily that. It is a little bit in some parts, but I was reading the trigger warnings from to one of my friends that doesn't read dark romance because she was asking about my writing, and I was like, well, it's not the darkest thing out there, like, but like this is the darkest thing I've read. It was like, what is it? One of Santana Knox's books. But I was reading her the trigger warnings, and she's like, wait, what's that? Wait, what's that? What's that? What's that? I'm like, some of this stuff is like real stuff, and then you kind of brought that into like a real perspective because a lot of people that struggle with depression do hurt themselves just to kind of feel like you had the whole scene with like the lighter and
Mhm.
the cutting and he participates in that, and it's like it's that fine line of like giving her what she needed and giving people being able to like do what they have to do to like it's like their form of self-care, but it's not, but some people would
Yeah.
consider it taboo.
Yeah,
So
now that you're like now that you're bringing these things up, I'm like, yeah, I guess yes. Like I kind of forgot that that when you phrase it like that and like when you're talking about it in context of like not this story, yeah, totally. I see exactly what you're saying. And yeah, I guess it would be. And I do get very vitriolic reactions to a lot of the things in my book. So yeah, I guess yeah, there are taboo things in it. And I think though one of the things that's really important to me is like she was gonna do it. She's gonna do it no matter what. And I think like it was a sense of like care and like almost like safety for him to participate in that and help like and oversee it as opposed to her potentially going too far. So for that was kind of my reasoning for that part of Aiden's character and him participating as like he's like she's gonna do it no matter what. And if I can do it in a controlled and careful way, like that could potentially, save her life or like
yeah,
protect her. So for me, it's kind of funny to think about it that way because like in my head, I'm like, oh, it's such a loving
yeah.
thing, and I'm like, oh, but people, it could be very controversial.
To me, it was very loving, and that I loved that part of him. You know what I mean? That he was accepting her, but he also was like, I need to hold her head above water, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
Like
but
I
I
wouldn't be
didn't.
like, oh, this is healthy relationship dynamic,
Yeah,
but in the
I mean, but
context,
what is healthy, like relative, right? It's just like
right? Exactly.
our addictions and our sense of the taboo comes from it all. It comes from all this stuff being so like censored and regulated that
Right.
it becomes exciting to some people. So like that's like a whole nother topic of what is healthy, which is if it's helping somebody, then
Right.
I don't know. It's I have very I have a very big threshold. I'll just say that. So like to me, like and I didn't think about it either, but my other friend is like, dude, I'm in the store and you're telling me this? Like
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think like for me, it's like these topics are things that I've always thought about as someone who struggles with a lot of these things, and like you don't really realize like how shocking it can be until you talk to people who really are. That's not a part of their story, or it's not a part like something they really experienced or thought about. It's interesting to see that. Again, I can really tell which readers have never even considered these types of things or had them like in their circle or anything like that, and then versus readers who are like familiar with them and talking about them.
for sure. And this is like, not to get all deep, but I always end up getting deep with people. Does it ever upset you that people are upset that this is being represented? Just like what what Sky was going through in the book with depression and how she was dealing with it, does it, because to me, I kind of get mad at people. I'm like, well, you're mad, but like there's people that are really like this. Like, is
Yeah.
it upsetting to you ever that people are like so upset about it when it's a reality for so many people in this world and we just ignore it? And you had some lines in the book that address that, like people basically brush off like the sad girls and the dark and depressed girls, and they're just almost pretend like it's not real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like when I define like how I feel about it, like I'm not upset, like angry, because I can understand like how people can feel shocked or like worried that this is being like norm like I hate the word normalized, but like I get a lot of comments that are like, oh, you're romanticizing this, or like DMs like you're a terrible person, you're romanticizing like all this stuff. And I'm like, I wouldn't say it's romanticizing it. I would say it's opening a dialogue. Like, yes, it's a romance book, but that doesn't mean that this part is what is supposed to be romantic. The romantic part of this is someone caring for someone and protecting someone and like finding someone when you're so desperately lonely that can match, your needs. But I don't get angry. I get protective of other people who are in the same, who have experienced a lot of the same things as me, or who have experienced these things. I will always go to bat and be like, well, actually, have you ever thought about this way? Like, if you're coming into my space, of course, I never go into like reviewer spaces or anything. But if you're commenting on my public video, or if you're coming into my DMs, or you're tagging me in your story, I usually try to open a dialogue with people who are like really upset about it. And I'll be like, look, like, I understand where the worry is coming from, but have you ever considered this? And like I usually point, I really try and talk to people about like, autonomy, because for me a lot of this story is about like the autonomy of like coping with these things, because no one can understand what's going on in your head, or like how heavy suicidal ideation and mental health struggles are. And I think to cast judgment on someone for trying to cope with that in a way that you don't understand is very small-minded. And I'm also the kind of person who thinks like, people should have the autonomy to decide what to do with their bodies and their lives and how they live. And of course, like I think everyone should get help that they can, but like I think it's dangerous to cast judgment on how people handle these things. So I always try to open dialogue, like, have you ever thought about it this way? So instead of getting angry, I mean, there are some things that people have said that have made me like sad, as someone who is like, Sky is very much written based on my own experiences, and I do say that in the front of the book. So when people are like, oh, Sky is so whiny, or I hate her, she was like a miserable character, I'm like, yeah, that she is miserable. That's kind of the point. Like, a lot of people experience this kind of misery, and it's very hard to live through. So I think like those things are like kind of hit me personally, but like I don't ever really feel angry. Most of the time it's just like disappointed that people aren't willing to try and understand, but I do understand it.
Yeah, that kind of was like going to be my next question. Like the way you write about this, as somebody that's gone through it, not with the ghost, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
what how Sky feels. I had to ask you if have you struggled with? You just said you did struggle with a lot of what she's gone through. So you kind of answered my question. You stole my next question and answered it ahead of time. You're such yeah, because the way you write about it, like somebody that hasn't been through it would not be writing about it the way you've written about it. And I'm sure that a lot of people have reached out to you. And when I say representation, it goes beyond LGBTQ or body sizes or demographics. It goes to like just straight up mental health for both of them. Like, because when he did what he did, he obviously was having some mental health stuff, and she has it too. And So yeah, just the way you write about it is, I'm sure a lot of people reach out to you. And do you find more people reaching out to you that are, getting catharsis, they're reading your work, than are upset
Yeah.
about it?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely like tenfold more positive, which I'm very grateful for. I've had an amazing reception to this book, and I'm super grateful. And I do really appreciate when people say like, "Oh, I really related to this," or like, "Thank you." Like, it's nice to hear that it's positively impacting people. So yeah, I mean, I'm super grateful and excited that that's been the vast majority of the reception, and like people have been. I think it's been really important to me to see a lot of people talking more openly about it with me and their friends. And like when they discuss the book on their platforms, they're mentioning like, oh, I feel more like comfortable talking about this. And I think I've always been very much a mental health advocate, like in in a lot of different phases of my life. Like I've had different platforms before, and I've, you know, operated in different spaces and stuff. And I think mental health has always been kind of a core value to me to like really try and like destigmatize it. So it's been very rewarding to see that be a large part of how the book has been received.
Yeah, I think I see more people benefiting from it than people that are upset.
For sure.
Not to credit their feelings if they don't like it, but I think that you've done a great job of representing what it feels like to be depressed to the point where you have to do these other things to make yourself like feel, or to distract yourself from other things. One of the more fun things would be obviously getting a ghost boyfriend. But
Yeah,
if you don't have that,
if only,
if you
And I
don't
will
have
just
that.
say that I understand, and I'm totally okay with people not liking this book for any reason. Like I know that I knew when I wrote it that it was going to be a very divisive book, and I was okay with that. And the positives of me writing it versus the other things I was ready to live with. So I will say, like, I think it's totally valid to hate this book or hate my writing style. I have no problem with that. It's just like more my issue is with when people come to me and like have an issue with just mental health topics in general. So just want to clarify that.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, that's what I got when you were mentioning it. This is another question. Do you have like a favorite time of day to write, or do you write at the same time? Do you get insomnia and write? Do you wake up and write? Do you have like a set time, or is it just like when you have time?
I try to write at night. I typically enjoy writing at night, just I feel like it's more like the vibe of writing
Yeah.
paranormal romance. I've always been a night writer, usually from like 8 to like 10:30. But I started waking up early when I was kind of in a rush to, or not a rush, but like kind of coming up on my deadline recently. And I've been waking up really early and writing for like an hour, and that's been kind of a nice addition to like my night writing. So we'll see if that continues. And I'm definitely a night writer. I will say my best writing comes like if I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't sleep and I write for like 3 hours. That is when like my most powerful stuff comes out because I'm not distracted by the
Mhm.
day or like my other thoughts. So yeah, definitely a night writer, but I would say like that sweet spot is like 1 a.m. insomnia.
Mhm.
But it rarely
Yeah.
happens because I try and I have to work full time, so I don't really get that opportunity very often.
They try to wake you up. I feel like the characters will like pop up like Alec, in the
Right.
hypnagogic state, and just be like, "You should add this about me,"
It's
or
always the most inconvenient time too.
yes. So, yeah, the insomnia stuff, there's something weird about that, like insomnia writing, that it just makes you super creative. Like,
Yeah, it almost feels magical. I feel like I'm just in a totally different space when I write that way.
I mean, a lot of people like say that's like the portal times, like, witchy time, so,
Yeah,
and people will say this is the witching hour, anywhere from like midnight to 3 a.m. But
yeah,
like, there's something about being awake and just inspired when the world is asleep that
yeah,
gives you, especially if you're writing dark romance or paranormal,
right.
you could kind of like, you're in that space almost. So I totally get that and I love it. Good question, Philip, because I wouldn't have even thought about that.
Thank you.
So is there anything, we've got 10 minutes left. Of course I could talk to you forever, and but is there anything about this book or any of your writing that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about or address? Any topics that you want to talk about that we didn't get to talk about?
Um, sorry, I don't know why that squeaked. I think we really covered like the big things. I will just say like I know we touched on like kind of like what my core of my writing is, and I will say also like I didn't touch on it much, but body diversity is a huge part of my writing, and I think it's really important to just like emphasize that like plus size books, or like books with plus size characters, are not just for people in larger bodies. I think they're super beneficial to people who are straight sized or dealing with any kind of like body, you know, issues. I think it's super powerful to see like this breakdown of like what the typical stereotypical a heroine is in a book, and like be able to like explore that and like accept that. I think getting comfortable with that is really important for all readers, to kind of dismantle like a lot of the fat phobia we have in society, and the way that we expect people to show up in fiction as like these perfect beings, or like they're only flawed in ways that are physically appeasing. And I think it's important to like have diversity on your bookshelf. So I highly encourage everyone, even if you're not a plus size person, if you're drawn to this book, to check it out. And I think that you'll benefit from like seeing someone who's not a typical FMC.
I agree with that. You had a picture of Sky like in lingerie, and I was like, that's what I look like. Like, because I've always struggled with like keeping weight off.
Yeah.
Even though I go to the gym, it's not like falling off. I've always been thick. So like to see
Yeah.
her in that and see like myself in that, I was like, I want to do that. I was like, I want to like cosplay her so bad, but then I'm like, I don't have the balls to do it because I don't want to do it. But seeing it more,
so fair.
but I was like, it was cool to see that. And there was another one where somebody wrote, it was kind of like a mob, I don't want to say mob romance, and he was all about some thick girl, and I was like, yes.
Is it Any Means Necessary by Lila Heron?
I didn't end up reading it, but I saw character art because I've been kind of like looking around for character art for my own characters. And I ended up going with such a good girl in book art, and she did one of my vampires. I'm like, oh my God, I need her forever now. But like,
yeah, I saw the art. It's great.
She's so talented, and she just did some watercolor stuff. Like, artists just blow my mind because I can like sketch, but I can't do all that. And they're doing it like on Procreate.
I can't do any kind of physical art other than writing, obviously, but I love art and artists. I am like my whole feed is like either books or like art, and that's it. And I'm obsessed. If I had the money, I would commission character art like every day.
Oh my gosh, I was just thinking that earlier. I was like, I need that picture, but I need him like post-feed vampire bloody.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and then people are like asking now, like, okay, like they saw a sneak peek. They're like, now we need the other vampires. I'm like, oh my gosh, like you guys got to buy books then, because like the artists cost money. So,
I know.
But it's beautiful, yeah. And I can tell that you're very art-minded, like the way you make your posts. Like a lot of care goes into it. Not a lot of people like realize like it takes a while to make one 30-second post, like, even if it's like a collage, because everything's got to be here and there. But I can tell you put a lot of care into it, and your aesthetic is gorgeous. So you definitely have an eye for art, whether you realize it or not. And obviously the way you write, because I was like learning when I was reading. I was like, oh my gosh, like the way you described it, it's just like, it was like I was watching this unfold. And I'm also like, a reader. I think all writers started as readers, obviously, because there's this divisiveness right now also in the book space. Like, if you're a writer, stay out of reader space. It's like, well, what do you think I do when I'm not writing? Besides think
No, totally. Yeah, I definitely think I know exactly what you're saying, because when I read, I feel like there's a lot of things that I'm like, I never really thought about doing that or trying that, or, oh, that's different than what I do. I wonder if I could like put my own spin on it, kind of thing, like the way people write and like different things that they do. It's interesting when you're really deep in writing too, like when you're working on a project, you are way more like you're analyzing other people's writing while you're reading, I think, a lot.
Yeah, especially moving beyond the whole like showing versus telling. Like, that's like something I'm learning right now. Like, I have my friend editing, and she's an amazing writer, and she writes fantasy, which makes me nervous because fantasy writers are like a whole nother level to me. Like the way they describe things, and like I'm all about world building, but they were like layers of worlds on worlds. They've got maps. Like, it's just so much for fantasy writers. But after she edited part of mine, I was going through the next chapters, and I was like, wow, it literally seems like he's just like sitting in a chair thinking this. Like, there's nothing else happening, and there needs to be more happening. So we learn. And would you say this is like your biggest like project so far, this series?
Yeah. So I've previously written under another pen name, but it was fantasy, actually, funny enough. But it was a different, I don't consider myself a fantasy writer, and I was very drawn to dark romance always. So I think this is like having a 3-book series I've never done, and I will say that I'm still a very new author. I literally only published something like 2 years ago for the first time, but I think like my writing style has drastically changed with dark romance, and I think like taking on a 3-part series with like very complex, nuanced topics is a lot to take on, and it's definitely been a challenge, but one I'm really excited about, and I think like the work holds a lot of meaning for me. So I think like it's definitely like pushing me as a person to grow. And I think when you write things that are so close to you and like based off your own experiences, it's very intense. Like book 2 is really, really hard for me to write. And I think people will see why when it comes out. I have to be very careful about how I talk about it because I don't want to spoil things, but there's a lot of really heavy stuff in it that is based on my own life, just like this one. So yeah, it's been an endeavor, and I think it will stay that way through all 3 books.
That shows through your writing. Thank you so much for coming on. Like, yeah, your writing is descriptive. It puts you in that space. But it has this rawness to it that just is like, I'm getting the chills thinking about it, because the way you write about like some of these like these things that I don't think are taboo that other people think are taboo. Yeah. Just your characters are raw and they're real, and I cannot wait to read like the rest of the series and anything else you put out. So guys, if you're not following Alexia, I have her information in the description. Go follow her on Instagram is where I see most of her stuff, but I know you are on TikTok too. And I've been following you on TikTok for a while, actually.
Yeah.
I was seeing your stuff and I'm like, I want to read it, but I'm afraid to read it. But I also want to talk to her. Because again, it's like, you can tell it's like a real topic. Like, it's not just, some dude with wings, which I don't mind, but it's raw is the best way I could, and I mean it in the best way possible.
Well, so thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you to everybody that joined. Working Blue, you just popped in. We are finishing up, but it will be available immediately on YouTube after this. Over the summer, I will be uploading everything to Spotify. I only have one season on Spotify, and it's all it's mostly UFO and occult and paranormal. So I look forward to talking to more dark romance authors, and I want to get some horror authors on, some horror romance. I just want to talk to everybody that is writing about stuff that people are afraid to talk about. Like, this has always been that space to talk about anything weird, paranormal, fringe, and we're going to keep it that way, and we're going to keep it with authors, but we're going to, fold some more people like Alexia in and have more fun with it. Thank you so much, Alexia. Hang out. I'm going to end the stream now. Remember to, of course, you're always welcome back. Like, subscribe, share are the things they say for me to say, even though YouTube doesn't care about me. Anyways, have a good night, guys.